Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Julie Zuckerman. Welcome.
Thank you, Erin. Great to be here.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to have you. A little bit about Julie Zuckerman. Her fiction and nonfiction have appeared in a variety of publications, including The MacGuffin, Salt Hill, Crab Orchard Review, and others. Her debut novel in stories, The Book of Jeremiah, this lovely book I have right here, was the runner up in the 2018 Press 53 Award for Short Fiction. It was published in May of 2019. She is a native of Connecticut and resides in Israel with her husband and 4 children. So, welcome, welcome. I am so excited to talk today about the Book of Jeremiah. Please tell me about the book.
Great. So the Book of Jeremiah is a novel in stories. It takes place over 8 decades from Jeremiah's childhood in the Depression up through the contemporary era. But it doesn't go in chronological order. It jumps around from 1938 to 2006 to the 50s, and the book is really focuses on Jeremiah and his family members through their struggles and triumphs. As I said, from his childhood in the Depression through his youth and his service in World War II, to his early adulthood, and we see him as a father. We see him as a professional. He's a political science professor in his career, and we see him as a husband. So that's what the book is about. His life.
Oh, yeah,
Not a great elevator
fantastic.
pitch, but
Yeah, so interesting. And I'm really curious about this novel in stories, especially because, as you said, the stories are not told chronologically, that you do sort of jump around. Can you tell me a little bit more about like what drew you to that structure and then how you decided to put all the stories together?
Sure. So the first story I wrote in this whole collection is called Mixmaster, and it actually ends up being the last one in the book. But in that story, Jeremiah is 82. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but he's semi-retired and he takes on a new hobby, which is baking. So that was the first story I wrote, and I really became enamored with his voice and with the character, and I wanted to understand else had happened to him in his life that caused him to be the way he was at 82. And so I wanted to unravel his life. And I started and I had also recently read Olive Kitteridge, where I really loved that the way with every story you see another layer of Olive. I'm now reading Olive again, by the way, the
Oh,
sequel.
yeah, I haven't
Um,
read that yet, but I'm so excited that Elizabeth Strout did a sequel. Yeah.
So I had that in mind, and my original thought was that I was going to go in reverse chronological order, right? Have Mixmaster be the first one, but that didn't work for a variety of reasons. And one of the main ones is because the first story, chronologically speaking, is really a bit more of his brother's story. Jeremiah is only 6 in that story, so I didn't want to end on that one, and I also didn't want to start that one. So it took me a long time to figure out the right structure. When I looked back at my spreadsheet, I see I had 6 different possible structures for the book. And what helped me finally crack it was one of my writing teachers said to me, think about it in thirds, So for every third, you need some stories that have like a young Jeremiah and an old Jeremiah, and some of the stories are told from his family members' point of view, not only from his. So I needed to find a balance for each third. And the other main thing was I needed to find a thread that wove its way from one story to the next. There's a wonderful essay called Stacking Stones in a David Jouse craft book called Alone with All That Could Happen, and he talks about the different ways you can structure a story collection. And the one that stayed with me was this finding a thread. So in one story in my book, it's told from Jeremiah's son's point of view, and we understand that he and his son don't have the greatest relationship. The next story takes place when his wife is pregnant with a son, and in that story, Jeremiah has just moved his young family from Washington, D.C. up to the Berkshires, where he's kind of pivoted in his career from government work into academia. But by the end of the story, he's really unsure. He's not sure he's made the right decision to move his family, and will he find a place at this university, and is it the right thing for him? And he's left with this feelings of doubt at the end of that story. And then the meaty story right after that jumps 40 years in the future, and it's called Emeritus, and we see, oh, yes, he has made it. He's still at the university. He's found a place there. So I really tried to find a thread that connected one story to the next.
Oh, fascinating. And what like a really interesting and dynamic challenge, and almost just like this tapestry, right? Of like figuring out how to weave it, how to tell it, especially too, both with perspectives, of Jeremiah's perspective and then also with his family perspective.
Right.
That sounds really, really fascinating. And, I also saw on the acknowledgments page, as long as we're talking about weaving things in, that you said various bits of family lore made it into many of these stories. So can you tell me a little bit more about some of the family lore that also got woven in?
Sure. So there are some things that were inspired by family history. For example, in the first story, Jeremiah is 11, and he's celebrating the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is when you kids dress up. It's kind of like the Jewish Halloween. And Jeremiah dresses up as a ritual slaughterer, someone who can make sure that meat and chicken is kosher. And there's ways that you have to kill the animal and et cetera. So, and in the story, Jeremiah carries around a live chicken in his synagogue. And that comes directly from my father, who at age 9, and what he was grandson of a kosher butcher, he was dressed as a ritual slaughter, a shochet, as we say in Hebrew, and carried around a live chicken. And in fact, my father, in the story, Jeremiah carries around a fake knife, but in real life, my father carried around a real knife also.
Wow.
And I'm sure that would not fly today. But it was part of the costume, and he won the costume contest, my dad. So, and we have a picture of it. So that's just
Amazing.
one little example. Other things, my grandfather served in the Signal Corps in World War II. So when Jeremiah, as a serviceman, it was natural for me to place him in the Signal Corps. But then I still had to do a lot of research, a ton of research. Just like, what were Signal Corps soldiers doing after D-Day in France and Belgium? So those are just two small examples of family lore. Then there was other little kind of quirky things my mother has done that made it into the book. It might have only been like one line in the book, but it was fun for me to give those little cameos.
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's so fascinating. And especially too, as you conceive of, the life of Jeremiah over the course of all of those decades. It is really fun to sort of like also think back about your own life, about like, oh, what are the like gems that I remember? What are the stories that like my parents and grandparents have told over and over again? So I think it's just a lovely commemoration, both of your family and then also of Jeremiah, of this character you've created. That's delightful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you mentioned too, kind of some stories with the synagogue and with Jewish tradition, and Jeremiah is Jewish. So can you talk a little bit about the role of faith as it kind of plays through the story, and as you worked with faith with the character of Jeremiah?
Sure. So he's a child of Jewish immigrants, and he's brought up in a home that is fairly traditional, although like my grandparents, they had to adapt to things in the States that they wouldn't have done in Europe. For example, they went to synagogue on the Sabbath, but my grandfather had a liquor store, and he had to keep it open till in the 30s or 40, whenever he opened his liquor stores, till 11 o'clock at night. So they wouldn't necessarily bring in the Sabbath at the time it's supposed to be brought in, which actually is it also appears in one of the stories. But they still certainly would consider themselves observant Jews. As he gets older, Jeremiah is not so observant anymore. He and his wife, they belong to a synagogue, but they don't go very often. They don't give their kids. Their kids go to religious school and have bar bat mitzvahs, but they're not particularly they're not particularly observant. And then his daughter actually marries somebody who's not Jewish, and this does not bother Jeremiah at all. Whereas if it had been a generation before, his in fact, there's a story about this, that his mother would have been beside herself if he or his siblings had married out. So I but I still, even though they're not so observant, they still feel very culturally Jewish. But with each generation, I think it's going to be less and less. We see that in one of the stories with his daughter.
Oh yeah, fascinating. Fascinating. And such a good exploration too. Like I keep coming back to the, because you span a lifetime, you're also then
Mhm.
touching the generations on either side, right? You're seeing
Right.
Jeremiah's parents and grandparents, you're seeing his children, and potentially grandchildren. And so all of those things kind of playing together. And so in the course of one life, you can see those 5 different generations and how much change can happen over time. Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And even his children still, his daughter, in this one, then the story told from her point of view, she's actually on a trip to Israel. So that was easy for me to summon up the sights and smells and everything that she's experiencing, because I, live that on a daily basis. But she's all of a sudden wondering, like, why didn't they teach us more? And why, all of a sudden she has a bit of a spiritual awakening, more than her parents have ever had. But I
Fascinating.
mean, also she has this fondness and warm memories of her grandparents.
Yeah.
She misses them. So
Yeah. Oh, so lovely. So lovely. So my next question is a little bit of a pivot. So I read that some of the stories in this collection you sent out to over 100 literary journals and revising and resubmitting along the way before they finally were published and finally found a home. And I just want to first of all applaud you for your resilience. That is a lot of rejection. And also I would love to hear from you about how did you kind of keep up the stamina, the momentum, that resilience? How did you trust the process? And what did you do on the hard days? I feel like we all have challenges that require us to keep showing up, and hopefully they don't require 100 rejections. But as someone
yeah.
who's gotten, in the 3 digits of rejections, what can you share with us about your resilience?
Yeah, you have to have such thick skin as a writer. Oh my God. I those stories there's 2 that were rejected over 100 times, including that first one in the book, which takes place when he's 11 and is dressed as, up, and he's dressed up. And I really loved that story. I didn't want to give it up. I was like, I'm going to keep working on it. I must have revised it, had like 15 major revisions of that story. And I kept thinking he was done and sending it out, and I would get, rejected, sometimes nice rejections, but it wasn't enough. So I just kept tinkering away, because I refused to give up on it. And after about, I don't know, 4 years or so, and like I kind of, the way I have insomnia sometimes, so the way I get myself to fall asleep is like just lying in bed thinking, like, okay, what can I do? What can I do with the story? What can I do with the story? And I don't remember where I was, if I was lying in bed or how, but I all of a sudden saw what the perfect ending for the story could be. And I had the story going on much longer, the original version, much longer than it does. And in this story, Jeremiah is kind of a mischievous kid, and all of a sudden, the perfect prank that he could pull kind of came to me. So I think there must be something with sitting with the story for so long that it just finally happened. I finally figured it out. um, and with the other one, yeah, I don't know how many revisions it had. Not like significant, but I just kept tinkering away and looking for the right fit. Um, but yeah, it takes a lot of a lot of resilience. So what do I do on the bad days? I really, I have this. I'm a bit of a masochist, because in my spreadsheet, my rejection spreadsheet, I'm like, I want to see how many rejections per week I'm getting. So I have a different worksheet called rejections per week. And so I can see if I think the worst week I ever had was 11 in one week. Uh,
That's a rough week. That is a rough
I
week.
know, I know. And then there's like weeks that I get 0. I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? But you know what? I kind of wear those rejections as like a badge of pride. I really do, because you got to get out there. You got to put yourself out there, and you just have to find the right reader. I mean, the whole collection also, I didn't go the agent route. I was told that it'd be hard for me to find an agent for a story collection. So I just started applying to small presses on my own. And I also got projections from them, but some of them really nice and complimentary. And then when I got the email from the publisher at Press 53 that said, like, "Dear Julie, congratulations, we want to publish your book." What? Like, I had to read it like 4 or 5 times. I did not believe it because, part of me thought, like, okay, maybe it's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was such a dream come true. So
Oh, fantastic. Well, congratulations. And thank you. Thank you so much for your resilience. Like, so that we have, the book of Jeremiah that I can
right.
hold in my hands.
Mhm.
And so my last question, like, it's very clear how much like love and respect you have for your characters, especially Jeremiah. You can just kind of feel that, just kind of deep affection throughout the book.
Mhm.
And so I just would love to kind of hear you talk a little bit about like, kind of how you cultivated that for Jeremiah and why is that important in fiction?
Oh, for sure. You have to love your characters. I really do. Because if you don't, like, if you don't want to spend time with them, then who else is going to want to spend time with them? I mean, you really, even, I would hope I don't think any of the characters in my books are villainous or anything, but you really have to want to get to know them. I actually heard Elizabeth Strout speak the other night. She came to a library right near my parents, and so I got to go hear her. And she was also talking about, yeah, she loves all of her characters, every single one of them, and she would be happy to have coffee with them. And I feel the same way. I mean, I really, um, yeah, if I didn't love them, I wouldn't want to be writing a book about them. It's really, I mean, it's funny. People have said to me after, because Jeremiah is not always the easiest character. He can be very difficult and exasperating to his family members. And some people have said to me, like, I didn't really like Jeremiah. Whereas other people said to me, this guy last night said to me, oh my God, he's so me. He's so me. I completely identified with him.
Yeah.
And so that's great for me to hear that the characters are relatable. I mean, that's really what I'm aiming for. And I have been asked by other people, like, well, what's the takeaway? What do you want people to take away from your book? And I had to think about that for a while. But my answer is that because to me, the book is really about family. And which is one of the reasons, by the way, that I set it in the States, even though I live in Israel. My whole family is here. My grandparents, my grandparents are not alive anymore, but this is where they live. This is where, my whole experience was up until the age of 25. So it was natural for me to set it in the States. And then what the takeaway that I'd like to be is, even when you have people in your family that tend to be difficult, I hope what comes through in the book is this undercurrent of love and acceptance by Jeremiah's family members, by Jeremiah to his other family members. He's not the only one that behaves badly some of the time. I mean, everybody does, but who doesn't, right? That's life. Even the most solid, stable person can crack sometimes.
Right.
Um, so, so what I wanted to get across, I guess, is that if you approach the difficult people in your life, especially difficult family members in your life, you approach them with love and acceptance, then that's what you should do. Love wins, basically. That's my
Oh,
takeaway.
Oh, that is a beautiful takeaway. That is a beautiful takeaway and a beautiful place for us to close this conversation. Well, thank you. Thank you for spending time and for loving and respecting Jeremiah to create this gorgeous book, the Book of Jeremiah. And thank you for giving us that lesson so that we can spend time with him and we can have that takeaway to when we have, a family member who might be a little bit hard for us to handle, that we can know that there's
Right.
this rich history behind it and feel the force of all of that family and all of that intergenerational love. So that's fantastic. So,
Thank you.
Julie Zuckerman, thank you. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, and thank you for writing the Book of Jeremiah.
Thank you, Erin, for having me. Yay.